My name is Dawn Volpe. I'm the pastor of Ephraim Moravian Church, and I'm standing here on sacred ground. The Ephraim Moravian Church was built in the 1800s. It's over 150 years old. The Moravians came to Ephraim in 1853. But I want to talk to you about another very sacred place, and that's up the hill from here on Norway Street. It's our cemetery. And it enfolds all our sacred ancestors, the people who built Ephraim, the people who loved this place and gave us such a marvelous legacy. You're here because you're going to see some of our dearly departed. They've been gone for many years, but every year we resurrect them for a few moments so that they can tell their story. We started this 10 years ago because we who are above ground wanted to honor those who are beneath the ground. The people that you're going to hear from, some of them lived through the 1918 pandemic. Now, of course, when they were living, there was no Revo, there was no internet, but they survived, and so will we. We're publishing this on All Saints' Day. Now, I don't think any of the people that we're talking about would say that they were saints. They weren't just saints because they died and went to the Savior. They were saints because they built this beloved community, because they loved God's people. You're going to hear their joys and their sorrows. I hope that in another 100 years, when we're below ground, that someone will speak of our legacy in this beloved community. Thank you so much for being here, and may you have a blessed day.
And thank you so much for coming. Are you able to stay with us? Okay, good. Okay. My name is Emma Marie Borg Wilson, but all my life I've been known as Petie, so you may call me Petie if you'd like. I was born in 1913 in Chicago, and I lived for 90 wonderful years. I was born to Emma Peterson Borg and Eric A. Borg. They were both of Swedish descent. I had one brother, Ragnar, but we called him Bugs, so we were known as Petie and Bugs. But we grew up in Chicago with all the wonderful Swedish traditions. My mother, Emma Peterson, was born on a farm in Little Sister, which is just not too far from here. My father, Eric A. Borg, was born in Sweden, and he immigrated to our country when he was 19 years old. He had big plans for himself in his new country, and fortunately, he was able to achieve his goals. He founded the Eric A. Borg Construction Company in Chicago. His company was known for building extremely large buildings in Chicago, mostly office buildings and apartment buildings, and later hospitals and schools. Most of the large buildings were on Wacker Drive. Many you might recognize. As a child, I was able to come to Door County every summer because my mother wanted to visit her family over in Little Sister. Now, by the time I was old enough to come every summer, the farm had become the Little Sister Resort. But the barn still remained there, and that was wonderful for me because I loved horses. What little girl doesn't love horses? Nothing better than being on the back of a horse. The only problem being that our horse was a retired racehorse. Well, that made it very difficult, if not impossible, to ride with my friends because we always had to be at least a nose ahead. I had a lovely childhood, and one thing that we are so thankful did not actually happen was, when I was quite young, two teenage boys, thinking my father probably had money because of his business, they laid plans to kidnap me for ransom. Can you imagine? I didn't think much about it when I was a child, Fortunately, the whole plan was averted. Adults had found out and notified the police. But as an adult, I thought, what a terrible thing. When I had my own beautiful girls, Holly and Toby, I just couldn't imagine anything so bad. As a girl, as I grew, the one thing that went through, the thread that went through my entire life was the love of music. My parents realized when I was quite young that I loved music, and so they provided me with piano lessons. And before long, I was able to play all of the classics. The other thing I loved to do was to compose music. I never dreamed that my music was as good as those composers of which I played, but I continued to do it throughout my life. And I didn't like to perform for anyone but my family and for myself. After I graduated from high school, I went to Wheaton College in Wheaton, Illinois, and it's still known as a wonderful school for performing musicians. I continued to come up here during the summers as a young adult, and all of the young people would gather down at Wilson's Ice Cream Parlor. Perhaps you've heard of it. Well, one of Mr. Wilson's sons, Hollis, used to work behind the counter, scooping ice cream. I was quite taken with him. He was so handsome. Well, he liked me too, and we became an item, and eventually we married. We married in 1937 and then went to live with my parents on the north side of Chicago. At that time, Hollis was a very wonderful art teacher at Evanston High School, and he loved teaching art, but he knew that he was never going to make much money as a teacher, so he went to work for my father and my brother in the Board Construction Company. They built a house for us in Glenview, which I'm very proud to say I designed, and they also built a house for my brother Bug. So we were able to be close to family, and we remained in Glenview until we retired here after Hollis took full retirement. At some point he had bought a plot of land for us right over here in German Road, just around the corner, and built a lovely home for us there. It's now owned by a young couple who have named it Hollis House, which I think is just perfect. So in the summers, Hollis would bring my mother and myself and our two girls, and we would summer here. And he would come on the weekends, which was a very long drive from Chicago in those days. But bless his heart, he made it every weekend. I had many friends, but my very best friend was my sister-in-law, Kay. Kay Wilson was married to Hollis's older brother, Carl, and he would come on the weekends also. But Kay and I would spend the weeks with our children, and we'd talk for hours and hours. She was the treasurer for the Peninsula Arts Festival, and the whole association had a project, and they decided they would love for it to be music. Well, Lorenz Heisey, who lived also in Milwaukee and in Ephraim, had a friend and had heard of Thor Johnson. Thor Johnson was a very well-known up-and-coming conductor. He was the youngest American conductor in the United States. At that time, he was conductor of the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra. When Lorenz talked to him about bringing classical music to Dora County, he thought it was a wonderful idea. And he said that he would gather the music, he would hire the musicians, and they would come and perform if only we could raise $10,000. Well, in 1951, $10,000 was a lot of money. But after many meetings and much fundraising, we were able to achieve that goal, and we had the first music festival on August 6th, 1953. At that time, it was a chamber orchestra, and it was made up of 34 people. However, in time, it did become a full orchestra of 64. Thor Johnson was able to recognize extreme talent, and he brought many wonderful soloists to Door County. Many of those soloists went off to become internationally known, but they were able to stay with us because they'd only be here a few days out of the summer, and they enriched our family life just wonderfully. We would go out into the woods and get pine boughs because we were trying to cover up some of the items in the gymnasium. We didn't have the beautiful auditorium that we have now, of course. However, in time we did, but we printed the programs, we gathered the advertising, we did so many things, and it has been a success. I understand they just had their 65th season. So if you've not had the opportunity to go to the Peninsula Music Festival, it's a real treat, and I suggest you do it. Hollis and I retired to our home over here on German Road, and then belonged to the Moravian Church. And we are so glad that we had the opportunity to spend our last years here in Ephraim. Thank you so much for coming.
I suspect. If you live in Ephraim, Door County, Wisconsin, and your last name is Wilson, most people assume that you must have something to do with ice cream. And in my case, that would be true. So let me tell you how I fit into the whole family situation here. Tombstone says I was born in 1906. I died in 2008. I was almost 102 years old. I was born in Milwaukee, and I was the fourth and last child, 4 boys, born to Oscar and Martha Wilson. My father worked for a candy making company in Milwaukee. And in May of '06, before I was born, my father had a ruptured appendix. Not a good thing today, but certainly back in 1906, that was a real hard thing. And the doctor advised him not to go back to work for the summer, but to find a place where he could rest, relax, recuperate, heal, and so as it would be, my mother had a sister who had moved 6 years earlier to Ephraim, and her name was Tilly Valentine. And so we made the decision as a family then to come up to Ephraim in '06 and to live here for that summer. We rented a place from the Onison family. Again, another name that is so familiar to the history of this community. We lived down by the water, in right kind of downtown Ephraim. Now, my father wasn't given to just simply laying around and getting, healing kind of thing. He wanted to keep busy, and so he decided that he was going to do what he did in his occupation. He made candy, and then he sold that, and he also then added ice cream to what he offered to people, and that was very successful. And so we went back to Milwaukee for the school year again, and returned in the summer of '07. And again, he made ice cream and candy, hugely successful. So we went back again for the school year, and my mother and father decided that it was probably time, it was a good time for them to build a sweet shop up in Ephraim. And so we came back for the summer of 1908, and indeed we built the first of Wilson's ice cream here in Ephraim. There was an apartment above the ice cream shop, and that's where we lived. 4 boys, mom and dad, and in the coming years we made this dance between Milwaukee, Ephraim, Milwaukee. And we kept coming up here for summers, and we had the ice cream shop, and it was very, very successful. And finally we made the decision as a family to come up here full time. And when we came up here, it wasn't long before we realized that the apartment above our store just wasn't going to be sufficient for us, and so we built a home just a short ways from the ice cream shop, and that's where we lived for our next years. It was a good place for us to grow up. We had a lot of friends here. My Aunt Tilly had a couple of boys, and so being with the cousins and being with the friends was really good for us. We had a great time. My father wanted all of us as a family to be involved in the ice cream business, of course, and being the youngest of the boys, I became the delivery boy, and I would deliver ice cream to the folks who were out here in the various places around the ice cream shop. Homemade ice cream, of course, packed in ice, and I would deliver that. And I would even take the rowboat that we had down by the bay, and I would go north and I would go south, and I would deliver ice cream to folks that lived on the water, and it really was a good thing. probably some of the most exciting times for me were when we had the regatta in Ephraim. My goodness, hundreds of people came for that, and I remember setting up a stand to sell ice cream on Anderson Dock, and boy, that was hugely successful as well. That was great. And soon then I went in to work behind the counter, and I did not like that at first as much because I enjoyed being outside, and yet I enjoyed meeting new people, and especially meeting some of the young girls that came in to get their ice cream. And there was one young girl especially, her name was Petie Borg, and we kind of became pretty close to each other, and we would talk, and it was about 12 years after we met at the ice cream shop that we became husband and wife. And so it all started in the ice cream shop in Ephraim. Petie was from Chicago, and that will ultimately come into play in my life some years later. Schooling was an interesting thing. We all went to school up here in Door County, of course, and when my brother Harold, who was the oldest, was to begin high school, there was no high school up here in the northern Door area, so we went down to Sturgeon Bay, and we actually moved to Sturgeon Bay, and we had the school year down there, and then we would come back to Ephraim for the summer again, and we did that for a couple of years, 2 years, until 1918, and that's when the Gibraltar High School was built, and we no longer had to make that move back and forth from Sturgeon Bay back up here. We all graduated from Gibraltar High School, and we all went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and we all graduated from the university over there. I graduated with a degree in art, and I loved being on the rowing team. It was a great experience to be on that rowing team. I loved art. I loved painting. I painted in both watercolor and oils, and I did portraits, I did landscape, and I made silver jewelry, and I even made Petie's wedding ring that she ultimately would wear. I made some pewter birds that I mounted them in stones that I got from Pebble Beach, and even drew the attention of Jens Jensen up there in Ellison Bay, and ultimately the clearing. So with my art background in university as well, I decided to go on to the Chicago Institute of Art, and was hopeful of getting a degree in art from there. But that didn't work out. I realized that I needed to make some money. If I was going to get married, raise a family, I needed to do that. So I was hired by the Evanston School District to start a program of art for the high school there, and I loved doing that. I loved starting that program and teaching the young people art, and probably my most famous student, if you will, is a fellow by the name of Jim Ingwerson. And Jim and his wife Phyllis still live over on the Old Stage Road, and he's a wonderful artist, as those of you that may know him realize. But again, they didn't pay well. They in fact paid me sometimes with IOUs, and that doesn't work very well when you're trying to get some money together to start a family. So after 9 years, I left my position at Evanston High School, and I went to work for my father-in-law. He owned a construction company. They built schools, hospitals, apartments, large buildings, and I came on as a troubleshooter. And I would travel to the various jobs and find if there were issues and set about to have them corrected. All too soon, my father-in-law died. Now, Petie and I had lived above them in Rogers Park in a two-flat. We lived on the second floor with the girls, Toby and Holly, and on the first floor, Mr. and Mrs. Borg lived. And when he died, their son became the president of the company, and I became the vice president. it was a good company, and we ran that company for many years. And ultimately, we sold the company. And in 1974, we moved up here to Ephraim and Door County for our remaining years. As you see, Petie died in 2003, and I died in 2008. So from 74 to 08 was 34 years. I lived up here finally in my beloved Ephraim and loved every moment of it. And so it was a great family, a great life, and I thank you for coming and let me share part of that life with you.